Is the Virtual Boy a commercial failure, as everyone says, or the most underrated console to date? My Virtual Boy was destroyed in a pretty terrible accident recently, which means I will only be able to show you pictures of the system. My apologies. But in today's review, we will be looking at the Nintendo Virtual Boy, the first 3D console made by Nintendo. It was released in 1995. The Virtual Boy was quoted to totally immerse players into their own private universe in an official press release from Nintendo. We will be looking at most of the games available for the console and find out once and for all if it really is a console flop or just underrated. When first released, the system was priced at $180 retail in America and was a commercial failure. Several price drops were made to make the system more appealing, but it was discontinued in March 1996. The Virtual Boy was originally created to, quote, reignite the market. Surprisingly, the Virtual Boy was developed by the same man that made the Game Boy line, Gunpei Yokoi. One of the reasons many people think that this was a failure was due to research and development teams at the time being busy at work on the Ultra 64, or rather the Nintendo 64. This left two other teams to experiment with whatever they liked. I'm not joking, that's what Nintendo said. Nintendo wanted the Virtual Boy released not only spark the market, but to also have the first portable video game console capable of displaying true 3D graphics out of the box and keep the reputation of innovation. Considerably more powerful than the Game Boy, the Virtual Boy was never meant to be a replacement and was released early in its developmental cycle to focus more on the Nintendo 64. Unfortunately, whatever the Virtual Boy may have became, several restrictions prevented it from ascending to a truly great console. Due to the black and red graphical stylings, this caused many people headaches and bothered people's eyes. Similar events have occurred with the 3DS, but on a much smaller scale. Nintendo claimed that a color display would have made the system too expensive and resulted in jumpy images, so the company opted for monochrome display only. Due to the Virtual Boy being an all-inclusive system, this prevented people from playing these games on television screens and added eye strain. Most games even come with an auto pause feature after 30 minutes of gameplay, which you will see later in this video. Though it should be noted that many of the demos, when first displayed, the Virtual Boy was being used on televisions, which means it did have the capacity to do so. This was a big problem considering many parents were afraid that their children would have eye strain and eye problems from playing the Virtual Boy, and that didn't help sales at all. But even when these reports were pouring in from the trade show, before the system was released, Nintendo still decided to release it and had $20 million ad campaign for it. The system itself was marketed as a portable console, though it was hardly like the Game Boy. This was the reason that many people talk badly about that aspect. While the Virtual Boy wasn't tiny or handheld, since it had boy in its name, many assumed that they would be able to do with it what they had done in the past with the Game Boy. There was little portability with the system while playing games, though it was easy to pick up and take anywhere. The lightweight and portable system required players to stare into two eye slots, use a separate controller to play the games. Worse yet, the controller was very oddly designed, sort of a hybrid of an SNES controller and the Game Boy. It came with dual D-pads, A and B buttons, R and L triggers. Start and select were both on the left side, of the controller as well. Oddly enough, the battery for the system was on the controller and didn't last that long. Most people played the games by plugging it into the wall. The games were loaded directly under the eyepiece and were larger than the original Game Boy cartridges, but still quite small. 14 games were released officially for North America and 19 for Japan, though several homebrew communities like Planet Virtual Boy have worked to make others available like Faceball and Bound High. There were several demos for the game that never happened, such as the Mario game featuring a side-scrolling level with the ability to move into the background and an overhead section. A driving demo and Star Fox demo type, but none were released. You can see these videos on YouTube, though most of them are terrible due to the shaky cameras, but there are also pictures on Google that aren't as bad. Now that you know the history and the glaring flaws behind the Virtual Boy, let's take a look at some of the games. Please note that I altered the color scheme and only recorded one portion of the game due to the 3D effect not being able to broadcast very well. This is why the games have a few glitches and look purple, not red. The pack-in game with the Virtual Boy was Mario Tennis, a basic tennis game with some Mario characters. I won't focus much on this. I wasn't able to run and record it properly for the video, however I did play it extensively as a child. More or less, the 3D effects were mostly limited to the tennis ball, and that was about it. A much better tennis game would be Mario Tennis for the Game Boy Color. One of the first launch titles was Galactic Pinball, and as a fan of Revenge of the Gator for Game Boy, I really enjoy pinball games in this style. Personally, it's nothing special and didn't make much use of the 3D depth. The table is displayed in an upright fashion rather than a 3D look looking down on it. For a pinball game, it's not that bad. A lot of fun and features 4 levels to choose from. If you have a chance, I recommend you try it, as long as it's free or extremely cheap. Another launch game is Telro Boxer, a first-person boxing game similar to Punch-Out. This game took full advantage of the 3D depth, and you'd think it wouldn't be that engaging, but it's really fun. The goal is to knock out your opponent before they destroy your robotic armor. Rounds are timed, and the opponents are fairly difficult as you continue. This is one of the few games to use both 3D depth, first-person viewpoints, and use the controller effectively. It's a must-have for anyone interested in trying out the Virtual Boy. I was unable to record the final launch game, Red Alarm, but you're not missing much. It's a terrible wireframe version of Star Fox. Well, comparing it to Star Fox would be too good for it. Just see the AVGN's video of the Virtual Boy if you need to see this one. Tetris was released on the Virtual Boy, but it wasn't as fun as the original Game Boy version. I've never been much of a Tetris fan, but I would way rather play the yellow and green original Game Boy version than this one. This one is similar to Red Alarm and uses wireframe graphics and is just terrible. It shows your pieces falling down a wireframe, and it's very difficult to determine where to put them due to the boxes constantly moving. Just avoid this one. There are better puzzle games out there. The other puzzle game available for the Virtual Boy is Panic Bomber, and this one is based on Bomberman. I'd personally rather be playing Bomberman, but I guess this is alright. The goal is simple. Beat your opponent by solving your puzzle faster. Basically, it's a matching puzzle that involves, you guessed it, bombs. The story itself is odd, but doesn't really require it. After all, when's the last time you played a puzzle game for the story? All in all, decent puzzle game if that's what you're into. Try it out if you have the chance, but I wouldn't seek it out. Nestor's Funky Bowling stars a Nintendo Power character known as Nestor. Aside from that, it is just a decent bowling game. It slightly uses 3D depth with the ball going down the lane, but aside from that, don't expect much else. There are 3 modes: single player, which includes 1 game of bowling, 2 player, which requires 2 players, and challenge mode that allows you for several challenges every frame in exchange for points. And that's it. Seriously, there's nothing else to do with this game. No tournament mode, no league modes, no custom balls, no players, no nothing. The game uses a slider system and that takes into account the direction and power of the ball thrown. It goes really fast and is really hard to hit a strike. And if you hit anything less than a spare, Nestor will lose his mind. Every time you will see that animation. Though considering the game only has 2 single player modes, I guess padding it it was their only choice. If you have a Wii, the pack-in Wii Sports had a better bowling game. I suggest you try this game for free, but I personally wouldn't pay for it. Mario Clash, this is a reimagining of the original Mario Brothers and requires Mario to kill enemies by hitting them with turtle shells. This makes full use of the 3D depth, and you will have big problems if you don't use the 3D while playing it. The platforms often make you look like you're in a different position and can cause death easily. Other than that, it's just a long tower game that requires Mario to clear each level of the enemies. The only thing I did not like about this game is the fact that it's never explained why Mario's at Clash Tower, or why the enemies are there. But if you're dying to try it, it's not a bad game. Makes me wonder why this wasn't the pack-in game instead of Mario Tennis. Wario Land is another great game that is on the Virtual Boy, and is one of the only games that is more than just a puzzle game or sports title. This is probably the best game on the system, and one of the best Wario games I've ever played. It's a full Wario Land adventure and uses 3D depth several times. Right off the bat, you can see the 3D depth with enemies coming from the background to the foreground, traps, and even requiring Wario to do the same. Even the bosses take advantage of the 3D gimmick and are quite challenging at times. If there were more games like this out there on the system with Mario Clash, maybe it wouldn't have died out. I strongly suggest anyone who enjoys platformers or Wario get this game. It is a must-have. The final game I was able to record was Jack Bros. This game was developed by Atlas, which is famous for many interesting titles like Persona and Atelier Iris. The game's objective is to collect keys for each zone's level and jumping to the level below. Instead of life, there's a timer, and when you take a hit, time is removed. 3 characters are available. One uses weak projectiles and another uses a knife. Each character style depends on the player, but it's a challenging game. At the end of each level, there is a boss that the player must defeat, adding to the challenge. It is considered one of the more obscure and rare games, but that isn't a bad thing. If you're interested in this game, you should try it out for sure. You won't be disappointed. Whew! That was a lot of crap, but at least there were a few decent titles, and some that were even really fun, like Jack Bros or Wario Land. So, is the Virtual Boy as bad as everyone says it is? Well, for the time, yes. Back in 1995, if you paid $180 for this and picked up the launch titles, you probably would have been pissed. I played most of them at my friends, but I can't imagine paying decent money for a game like Red Alarm or Nestor's Funky Bowling. But by today's standards, if you could avoid those games and get one pretty cheaply, it's a decent system to play. As I said before, Wario Land and Jack Bros is very fun and engaging, along with Telrose Boxer and Mario Clash. I feel that many people base their opinion on the terrible games for it, and any system has its terrible games. Unfortunately, according to Game Over, Nintendo laid blame for the machine's faults directly on creator Gunpei Yokai, which was really wrong considering they rushed it to market to focus instead on the Nintendo 64. And considering there were decent games for it, who knows what might have happened if the pack-in game was Mario Clash or Wario Land. There were a few games I didn't look at, golf, baseball, fishing, but most of them were either similar to games I have already covered or just sports titles. Sadly, several of the other games I didn't cover that were decent were Japanese, and I wasn't able to play them. My final thoughts on the Virtual Boy: while many people demonize it, it sold 770,000 units before being discontinued a year later. Systems like the 3DO and the Philips CDI sold slightly better with 1 to 2 million units moved. Those systems retailed for $600 to $700 and had terrible games and worse FMV gimmicks. Aside from a few controversial gems, I'm still surprised that people think the Virtual Boy is a worse system. But this is where you come in. Do you think that the Virtual Boy was a terrible system? And why? And if you haven't played some of these games, try them out before you post a comment. I'm not suggesting anyone go out and buy a Virtual Boy or use an emulator, but if you have the chance, or just happen to have one, let me know. A lot of people say that the Wii U is similar to the Virtual Boy and is a commercial failure, but as of December 2013, the Wii U has sold 5.6 million units, nearly 6 times the Virtual Boy's worldwide sales. So just remember, games make the system, not the power or the features. No good games, no good sales. One final note, Reggie was asked if any of the Virtual Boy games were going to appear on the 3DS or Wii U, and even even he was unfamiliar with the Virtual Boy. So don't be a sheep and try it out yourself. I am Protomario, and I'm signing out. Please remember to like and share this with anyone. Perhaps I could get some interesting opinions in the comments. Thanks for watching, and please come back for another review.